Hey everyone, I'm your host Peter Zablocki, and you're listening to History Shorts. I hope everyone's having a great day so far, and thank you for making this show a small part of that. If you'd like to help me out with a small gesture, please leave History Shorts a rating or a review, and click that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. For sources and books used as the basis for these episodes, how to advertise on a show, and other information such as a list of our upcoming guests on the conversation series, or a link to our Patreon account where you can find exclusive episodes not heard here, please visit www.historyshortspodcast.com. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate podcast listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the globe, all in one place. Download Podcast Republic now and take your podcast experience to the next level. Having said all of that, in the pantheon of American political history, the Whig Party occupies an intriguing space. A party born from opposition, bound together by shared enemies rather than fully unified ideals, and ultimately undone by the very tensions it sought to manage. From the 1830s to the mid-1850s, the Whigs were a dominant force, producing presidents, shaping national policy, and championing a vision of economic modernization. And yet, in less than a generation, they would collapse entirely, their remnants scattering into the rising tide of sectional politics that would lead to the Civil War. Here is the rest of that story.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The Whig Party emerged in the early 1830s as a direct response to the presidency of Andrew Jackson. A Democrat was seen by his critics as a dangerous autocrat, so much so that they dubbed him King Andrew I. His aggressive use of executive power, particularly his veto of the recharter of the Second Bank of the United States, alarmed many political leaders. The name Whig was chosen deliberately, evoking the British Whigs who had opposed the tyranny of the monarchy in the 18th century. In American usage, it signaled resistance to perceived executive overreach of Andrew Jackson. In 1834, a coalition of national Republicans, dissatisfied Democrats, and members of the anti-Masonic Party began calling themselves the Whigs, uniting around the goal of curbing Jackson's power. From its birth, the Whig Party was a coalition rather than a monolith. Former National Republicans formed the backbone of its leadership, drawn from Henry Clay's vision of the American system, with its emphasis on federal investment in infrastructure, a strong national bank, and protective tariffs to encourage American industry. They were joined by Southern planters who distrusted Jackson but remained weary of the growing political influence of Northern industrialists. Evangelical reformers, inspired by the moral fervor of the Second Great Awakening, lent their support for reasons as varied as opposition to perceived democratic permissiveness and the hope of promoting causes like temperance. Urban merchants and professionals seeking stable credit and a uniform currency found a natural home in a party that promised economic order. This diversity allowed the Whigs to compete on a national scale, but it also meant that their unity depended on shared opposition rather than a cohesive ideology, a fragility that would one day prove fatal. At the heart of the Whig platform was Henry Clay's American System, a sweeping program for economic development that envisioned a strong role for the federal government in guiding the nation's growth. The plan called for protective tariffs to shield American manufacturers from foreign competition and thus foster domestic industry. It advocated a national bank to stabilize currency, facilitate credit, and create a consistent financial environment in which commerce could thrive. It promoted federal funding for internal improvements, such as roads, canals, harbors, and later railroads, projects that could knit together the far-flung regions of the United States into a unified economic whole. Whigs argued that these measures would encourage prosperity, open new markets, spur technological advancement, and together strengthen the bonds between the North, the South, and the West. Democrats, by contrast, denounced the American system as elitist, unconstitutional, and a dangerous expansion of federal power. The Whigs quickly made their mark in Congress, however, serving as a disciplined opposition to Jackson's policies and blocking his initiatives when possible. Their first real test at the presidential level came in 1836, when they sought to deny Jackson's chosen successor, Vice President Martin Van Buren, an electoral majority. Rather than running a single national candidate, the Whigs put forward a slate of regional favorites: William Henry Harrison in the West, Hugh Lawson White in the South, Daniel Webster in New England, and Willie Person Magnum in the Mid-Atlantic, hoping to split the vote and thus send the decision to the House of Representatives. The gamble failed, and Van Buren won outright. But the campaign helped solidify Whig identity and lay the groundwork for a more coordinated effort in the future. In 1840, the Whigs rallied behind William Henry Harrison, the hero of the Battle of Tippecanoe. This time, they learned from their earlier mistake and ran a unified national ticket, pairing Harrison with John Tyler of Virginia. The Democrats, seeking to belittle Harrison, mocked him as an aging frontiersman who would be content to retire to a log cabin and drink hard cider. The Whigs seized on this caricature, however, turning it into a brilliant populist symbol. Campaign rallies featured log cabin floats, barrels of cider, and an endless supply of patriotic slogans. Harrison was cast as the people's candidate, contrasted with Van Buren, whom the Whigs painted as an aloof aristocrat living lavishly while ordinary Americans suffered through the Panic of 1837. The irony, of course, was that Harrison was the one that came from a distinguished Virginia family, and Van Buren had much humbler roots. But in politics, perception often outweighs reality. The strategy worked. Harrison won in a landslide. Yet his presidency was tragically short-lived. He died of pneumonia just 1 month after taking office, leaving the nation in the hands of John Tyler. Tyler's succession, however, revealed the fragility of Whig unity. A former Democrat himself and a staunch advocate of states' rights, Tyler quickly clashed with the Whig congressional leadership. He vetoed bills to reestablish a national bank and resisted much of the Whig economic program. In a dramatic display of political rupture, most of his own cabinet resigned, realizing that he was more of a Democrat than a Whig. And Whigs in Congress formally expelled him from the party. Tyler's presidency became a cautionary tale for the Whigs. While they could unite to win elections, governing proved far more difficult when deep ideological divisions lay just beneath the surface. In the mid-1840s, the Whigs reached the zenith of their influence in Congress under the leadership of Henry Clay and Daniel Webster. They championed legislation to fund infrastructure, protect American industry, and stabilize the national economy. They also opposed democratic expansionism, most notably resisting the annexation of Texas on the grounds that it would inflame sectional tensions over slavery. The presidential election of 1844 offered Clay another chance at the White House, but his nuanced position on Texas cost him some support among both pro- and anti-annexation voters, allowing Democrat James K. Polk to narrowly secure victory. The loss illustrated the growing difficulty of balancing national ambitions with the increasingly divisive issue of slavery. The outbreak of the Mexican-American War in 1846 presented the Whigs with yet another challenge. Many party leaders opposed the war, seeing it as an unjust act of aggression aimed at expanding slave territory. However, when the war produced a national hero in General Zachary Taylor, the Whigs set aside their misgivings and nominated him for president in 1848. Taylor, a Louisiana slaveholder with no clear political record, appealed to voters as a man above party politics. He won the presidency, but just like Tyler before him, he proved only loosely attached to the Whig program. His sudden death in 1850 elevated Vice President Millard Fillmore, who was more in line with the party leadership but now faced a nation teetering on the brink of a sectional crisis. The Compromise of 1850 became the defining issue of the Fillmore administration. Crafted largely by Clay and supported by Webster, the Compromise sought to resolve the status of territories gained in the Mexican-American War. It admitted California as a free state, allowed popular sovereignty in Utah and New Mexico, abolished the slave trade in Washington, D.C., and enacted a much strengthened fugitive slave law. While the package temporarily quieted the immediate crisis, it drove a deep wedge through the Whig Party. Northern Whigs were outraged by the Fugitive Slave Act, which compelled citizens to assist in the capture of escaped slaves and penalized those who refused to. Southern Whigs, on the other hand, saw the law as a non-negotiable safeguard for their way of life. The uneasy truce between the party's factions was now visibly cracking. By the time of the 1852 presidential election, the Whigs were deeply divided and struggling to articulate a coherent national message. They nominated General Winfield Scott, hoping that his military reputation would unite the party as it had for Harrison and Taylor. But Scott's association with the unpopular anti-slavery wing alienated Southern voters, while Northern voters saw very little reason to back a party that seemed incapable of confronting slavery directly. Democrat Franklin Pierce won in a landslide, and the Whigs' national credibility suffered a fatal blow. The rise of new political movements soon compounded the party's troubles. The nativist Know-Nothing Party drew in voters, alarmed by immigration, while the Free Soil Party attracted anti-slavery Northerners dissatisfied with the Whigs' ambiguity. The passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854 was the death knell for the Whigs. The law repealed the Missouri Compromise and allowed settlers in Kansas and Nebraska to decide the slavery question for themselves through popular sovereignty. To many Northern Whigs, this was an intolerable concession to the slaveholding South. To many Southern Whigs, it was a reaffirmation of their rights. The party splintered along sectional lines, with most Northern Whigs joining a brand new party called the New Republican Party, which opposed the expansion of slavery, and Southern Whigs either drifting into the Democratic Party or joining the short-lived Constitutional Union Party in hopes of preserving the Union without addressing the slavery issue head-on. By 1856, the Whig Party had ceased to exist as a national force. Anyway, before I let you go, I should mention that although short-lived, the Whig Party left a significant legacy. Many of its leaders went on to play central roles in this new Republican Party I mentioned, none more famous than a certain Abraham Lincoln. Thanks for listening.